Hello, everyone. I'm happy today to welcome you in my second episode. And I now have a name to my podcast. It will be called Basic Science. So, why basic science? Because I love science and I love basic science. This is what I did or do for my PhD. And I think that basic science is really important. And we will come back to why basic science is important eventually. And in this podcast, as you know, we don't only talk about science, but also around everything surrounding academia, research. So, not only the science, but also trying to understand the scientist behind all the work. Because we will be like paradoxal, as I said. We will praise how amazing academia is, what are the bad things we see in academia, and it's important to be able to critique and get critiqued, because if you love something or someone, you should tell them what's good, what's wrong with them, right? And this is the second episode. It will be called the first episode in the title. And for this episode, I just wanted to introduce a little bit more myself. So I did actually a video about that. You should check it. So I'll link it on the YouTube video. So you will have a more detailed experience of who I am as a person. But I wanted to detail the podcast that we'll be doing here. And it's, as I said, it's a discussion. We will be really opening to really juicy topics, really critical and controversial topics. And the first one, you will have a bonus episode this week, because I'll be recording 2 episodes. This one is the introduction. And the second one, I asked you about what is the number one sufferings of students going to master's or PhD, scientists or researchers in academia. So we'll come back to that in a bit. But for today's episode, I just wanted to keep it simple for the introduction. I explained to you the name, Basic Science. I think it fits perfectly, the podcast, because we're not only questioning or trying to address scientific facts, etc., but also the scientist behind the work. And you will see that it is the truth or the reality you face, let's say, in the real, working world, are very similar to what scientists face. But some of the things in the system are not working as great as they should be. And my hope in this podcast is to open the eye to the people. And I know that a lot of people also think the same way. So I hope we can make changes in the good direction. And this leads me to maybe the first topic in that episode. It will be titled The PhD Journey, A Journey of Misery. And I will say why I decided on that title. The first thing I want to share with you is actually today 2 powerful messages. And they all come from my PhD advisor. And the first one is my PhD advisor. He always tells me, Charles, why do you wake up early and come here in the lab to do research? What motivates you? And this is really a very strong and powerful question. So I'll ask you the same question as what my PhD advisor used to ask me. at the beginning of my PhD. What motivates you to wake up early to come back to the lab? Um, Sometimes we worked crazy hours in the day in the lab. We forget ourselves. We kind of sometimes even sacrifice ourselves on the name of science. So, what motivates you? For me, the answer is as simple as acquiring knowledge, having fun, understanding how the simple processes of life work. As I told you, I love basic science. So, um, basic science doesn't really have any further application sometimes. And it's okay to understand that not all the discoveries will lead to curing big important diseases or expanding the lifespan of human beings or doing that or that or that. Just the fact of understanding how simple, or how I would say not simple, but how beautiful life is on this really downscaled molecular uh, point of view. I feel it's really amazing and rewarding to say there's a lot that we don't see that make this world working, our cells working, let's say, and our cell, like our body is composed of all those different cells. So it's amazing how everything works together to the same purpose. So yeah, this was the first question I had in mind: is what motivates you to wake up early, to go to the lab, do your experiment, even if it fails. Failure is not something we should be ashamed of as scientists. In the contrary, failure is allowing us to clothe a path, but open up maybe three to five other paths to explore, and hopefully one of those paths will lead to another yet discovery. And the other reflection that I had for this episode is, um, again, it comes from my PhD advisor. He used to say to me, Charles, you know what? Being a scientist is also living a life of misery. And this resonated a lot in me. Like, I was asking myself inside, like, what does he mean? Why scientists live a life of misery? And there's probably different layers to that. The first one is probably the most obvious. It's because science itself is difficult. As we said it, we are the most exposed to failure in our work. But this failure is, for me, a fuel to get excited and try to learn from that failure, to do better in some way, and to take from it and see how I can apply those failure in different ways. I really have a great example in my PhD where I've repeated the same failure for over 5 years until I understand what's really happening. And sometimes you might say, "This is crazy, Charles. Why repeating the same experiment for over 5 years until it worked? Why just don't giving up?" And I'll tell myself it's really rewarding, to finally find and understand, even troubleshoot some of those aspects. It really helps me in the same way personally to see what's wrong within me and try to perfect myself. We say, 1% better every day. In no matter what aspect of your life, you should get 1% better every day. And yeah, so science by itself is really difficult, really competitive. So indeed, it's a life of misery. But it could be really rewarding, when you read those scientific papers. And maybe this is an exercise we will do here in the podcast. Try to read the papers, maybe critique them, say, this is a very good paper, this is a really wrong paper. And trying to understand what can we learn from reading all those articles. But yeah, if I just summarizes, it's really amazing to read about all those findings that we do in science, because they shape the day-to-day society. And the second aspect of the misery I see is society moves on very quickly. They're really driven by results, and sometimes this is really difficult for the scientist to cope with, because as we said, failure is something we face day to day, and getting a result, for example, in my case, it took me 5 years to get the result I wanted. And we need to understand that maybe if to get that result it took us that long, maybe society is not really ready for that discovery yet. So society will wait. This is something I tell myself. And yeah, I will repeat this. So, don't fear, society moving really quickly and being result driven. If your result is not showing up yet, it means that society is not ready for your discovery yet. So be patient. This is a skill set that scientists have to learn, being patient. But I also agree, and this could be a debate by itself, like the place of the scientist in our current societies, where everything is moving so fast and science is it seems to be taking ages to make discoveries. How can a scientist deal with that society that is quickly evolving? So this is another aspect of living a life of misery if you're a scientist in our current age and of time. Another aspect I see to it is human beings. I think I mentioned this a little bit in my prologue, but human beings are really complex creatures. And, we're not all, and it's a bit paradoxical with science being, objective, while us as human beings, we're driven sometimes with our emotions. So sometimes we make decision not really based on facts, but rather how we feel at the current moment. And sometimes it's hard to decipher, I would say, the human being from the scientists or the science behind, because those elements could be really complex. I'm really not a psychologist to I really understand the human being, but it would be really fun to have maybe a psychologist that is specialized in scientists and how scientist behavior. Maybe that can enlighten us more about this topic. So yeah, this is it for the first episode. The introduction. We have a name, Basic Science Podcast. Basic because I think we still need to understand the basic of science and research, but also the basic human rights and relationship we have to have within each other. And we'll come back to that aspect in the next episode that will come and that will get published in the same week to this introduction. So yeah, this was the first episode, the PhD, A Life of Misery. So be prepared. If you want to enter a PhD, you have to ask those two powerful questions to yourself. And I will repeat those two powerful questions that my PhD advisor asked me at the beginning of my PhD is, why would you wake up every day to come to the lab? And the second one is, why do you want to continue as a scientist in the path of their research if this is a life of misery? So yeah, have a good one, everyone. This was the first episode of Basic Science, and we will see you in the next one where we'll be discussing scientists, students, and researchers' sufferings.